Hi guys, so let's take a look at the Consumer Price Index and the way in which this is measured. Okay, now this is calculated via the following steps. Firstly, that there is a monthly collection of price data on the Living Costs and Food Survey. Approximately 750 consumer goods and services are in that representative basket of goods, which are common everyday purchases in most instances for households across the land. Okay, these goods and services will be updated as the economy changes, and so therefore goods that are less relevant will be taken out and substituted with more relevant goods which are becoming more important to consumers and households. Okay, further to that, weights are calculated according to the percentage of income actually spent. So this could be because perhaps of the frequency of the purchase or the actual price level being so significant perhaps. Okay. Now the base year must also be calculated for the index number. So given that we're using index numbers, and of course this is an index, you have to pick a starting point for a given product, and you must select that base year carefully to ensure that the actual level of inflation isn't unrepresentative in a given year for that given product. Okay, so that can pose some problems. Now let's have a look at how you may have to actually face up to a question about the CPI and the way in which it's measured. So here I've got two items which I've laid out: bread and butter. Now firstly, when it comes to bread, of course, we can expect to buy bread more frequently than we can butter. So because of that, we would expect bread to receive a higher weighting, which we can see it does, than butter, which doesn't need to be bought quite as frequently. So therefore, coming back to this point, calculated according to weights calculated according to the percentage of income spent, we can see that these weights are likely to represent the actual frequency with which these goods are bought. Okay, now here I've suggested from year 0 to year 1. Year 0, of course, the index number would have started at 100, so it's really important to be aware of that. So the index number would have started at 100 and has now risen by the end of year 1 to a whopping 130. Okay, so we can see a price change there of 30% actually taking place. Meanwhile, for butter, well, the price of butter has risen, perhaps due to the complementary nature of these goods, to 115, so it's risen by 15%, okay, up to 115. Okay, so now let's have a look at how we've got to calculate this. And this is really a four-step process that I've identified here. It is easier in the first year than it is the second though, and that's important to bear in mind. So first thing we need to do is we need to multiply the index value by the weighting. So we can see the index value here as 130, and so now we need to multiply that by the weight there. So 130 times 80, well, let's work that through. Sorry, let's just do that in the other colour. And we can see we end up with 10,400. Okay, so 10,400, 130 times 80. If we then move on to butter, 115 times 20 here, well, that would represent 2,300. Okay, so we've got 2,300 as our actual outcome for that calculation. So the next step is that we need to add these figures together. So yeah, we've got to total them up for all of the goods within our basket. Of course, this is a hugely simplified version of the work that takes place at the Office of National Statistics in calculating this CPI value, but nevertheless you could be expected to do this on a multiple choice question. Okay, so as we work through here, we can see that we get 12,700 as our total there. Okay, so given it's an index, we now must divide this by 100, and if we divide that by 100, then we can see that we end up with 127. Okay, so that is our rate of change from the base year. So this would tell us that given inflation has risen from an index number of 100 up to 127, the inflation in year one for these two goods is 27%. Okay, so that's 27% there. Now, let's just have a look at what happens when we do it for a second year. This is where they really like to catch candidates out. Okay, now, just notice also what I did here. I just disregarded the 1 because it's gone from 100 to 127, so therefore it's 27% change. Okay, so I just disregarded that 1, and it's important to do that, and that can be a distractor as a potential answer, so just look out for that on a multiple choice question. Right, so let's now have a look at some different index values. Let's have 145. So we can see it's now gone from 130 up through to 145. For butter, meanwhile, this perhaps may have risen to 122. The weightings of these goods are still the same, so they still remain the same. So again, we need to multiply through 145 times 80, and that will give us 11,600. Okay, so we've got 11,600, and then as we go through 122 times 20, we can see that we would end up with 2,300. Okay, let's just take that off there, and now let's run through the same method that we used previously. So we end up with 13,900 here, which again we must divide by 100. Okay, so as we divide that by 100, we can see that we end up with an answer as 139. Okay, so a common mistake that many candidates will now make is that they would identify that, okay, it was 127, okay, and it's now 139, so they may well say, oh, well, therefore the price increase is 12%. Okay, but no, there's one more step that you must use, okay, and that is the change in the index number divided by the original times 100. So let's just work through that. So we can see that we end up with a change of from 127 to 139. Well, that's a change of 12 divided by our original figure, which would have been 127, times by 100. So we worked through that response there, and that would then give us a percentage change in the actual inflation rate of, well, to one decimal place, 9.5%. Okay, so therefore we would end up with 9.5% as our percentage change in inflation. Okay, so you've got to bear in mind that it is only from that first year, from starting at a base rate of 100, that base year on your index values, when it goes up to perhaps 112, then you can see there's 12% change. But thereafter, you must remember this change divided by the original as a means of actually calculating the percentage change. That's really significant. Okay, guys, that's it for today. Thanks a lot.